What's up, good people of the world? Welcome to episode 2 of Let's Write Music. You might be wondering why we have a tune here if we're in the orchestration. And that's because somebody pointed out to me, well, actually several people, one person pointed it out, and then several people liked it, that the tune, the yada-da-da-da, that little motive was from Merry Christmas, Mr. Lawrence. I think that's what it's called. I had never heard that before, so I looked it up, and yeah, it's like almost the exact same thing. So I'm really glad that you guys pointed that out to me. So I decided to make a different tune. That was a really pretty piece, by the way. I'd never heard that before. Or maybe I like heard it, off the radio or something at some point, and it just sort of like popped out, or maybe it's just a coincidence, who knows. But in any case, I decided to take the yada da do da those notes A, B, and E, and see if I could make a new tune out of them. So I kind of messed around with them, yada do da da, or and another melody I found that uses those notes in a different combination is the Legend of Zelda Twilight Princess Midna's theme. Dee 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 do 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 do. So I want to try to avoid similarity with that. So what I ended up doing is I tried using it as a pickup, and I was originally going to record this, but the problem is the problem with me recording, like coming up with melodies as raw footage, is that half of me writing melodies is just like walking around when I'm like shopping or just doing something completely unmusical, and I'm just sort of like running through the tune in my mind and trying out different things like over and over again, and it just like takes hours and hours of just messing around in my head to and I can't record that. So I mean, I could sit there and kind of demonstrate it at the piano, but it'd be a little bit contrived and it wouldn't really give you an accurate view of how I create my melody. So I just sort of run through it in my head until I'm satisfied with it, with a goal in mind. So like my goal was to use that motive and to go for a certain dreamy feeling, so extensions. And so in this particular tune works very closely with the harmony. So I'll go ahead and play it. I came up with 3 different endings, not because I necessarily wanted to, but just because I couldn't decide. I was going to try and pick one of these 3 endings to be the main ending for the tune, but I couldn't decide. The first ending is pretty tonal and straightforward and kind of the normal thing that I would do. The second one uses that flat 6 thing that I've been kind of obsessed with recently, which is kind of nice. And then the final one at the end uses something out of the acoustic scale, where we're sort of going from Lydian with that raised 4, and then we're lowering the 7th degree of the scale. So it has this sort of like, it gives you a sort of MIDI whole tone scale. I love the acoustic scale, and I love going from Lydian to Mixolydian because the combination of having that raised scale degree with that lowered, the raised 4th with the lowered 7th, again, gives you a sense of wonderment, sorry. It sounds kind of like a whole tone scale. So we have all 3 of those options here. We might use them all. We might just use one. It depends upon, we'll see what works in the context of the piece. But I'll just go ahead and play this tune with the different endings and see what you think. So that's the first ending, and you'll notice, I started with a minor ninth, not a minor ninth, but a minor chord with a major ninth. If we're talking about intervals, and there's a lot of function change here. We have this B, which functions as the 9, and then it functions as the Lydian 4 and wants to resolve down, and then it does, and then we get it as the flat 6 of E flat minor, right? And then it leads down to the next chord. So I wanted to have a lot of kind of, I think sticking to that same note helps propel it, to maybe be a little catchy. Ya da da, ya da 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 da. So you get a sense of like emotional progression on that note. It does have a pretty big range for a melody, but I was hoping that the leap up and then just scale-wise motion down, and then another leap up and scale-wise motion down, that the scale-wise motion would help it, become whistleable, even though it has a pretty big range for a melody. Almost 2 octaves, actually. But anyway, so yeah, and then I wanted to make it, actually this should be A minor 9 underneath E, and that's kind of important because I wanted to make a lot of the a lot of the dissonant extensions like the ninth and the Lydian 4 to not be particularly dissonant against the bass line. And that's one thing that I like to do, and Williams does that a lot too. To where if you have like, let's say like the Lydian 4 or something, if you have the Lydian 4 against the tonic, let's say if like your F major, so your Lydian 4 is going to be B, right? So if F is in the bass and it's in root position, you're going to have that B against F, that really sharp tritone dissonance. But if you put the F in first inversion, you get a major second, right? You get B against A in the bass, and that's not, you still have the tritone in the middle, but the relationship between the bass and the melody, like I said before, is the most important salient relationship in music in terms of single tones that interact with each other. So it softens it up a bit. So I kind of did that with this. You can see with the E, this B reacts with the E as a perfect fifth. So it's very consonant, even though it's a dissonant note inside of the chord, right? And then again, it's a Lydian, which resolves down with yada dee dee dee, and the flat 6. And the over G, these inverted chords over here are really just for voice leading, right? And you can see that I tried to have as much contrary motion as possible. Like this chord is moving up, right, while the melody is moving down. I like contrary motion. Same thing here. Right, and this E flat minor going to E, right? It's kind of an inharmonic respelling, but you could think of the E as sort of an F flat. So we're borrowing from Phrygian. We're sort of using the flat too, Right, so flat 2. Right, and then this C minor thing right here was really something that led from the melody, right? It's kind of like the thing I was talking about in Williams, where he'll go to a note that normally would have existed in the scale, but then he'll change the harmony underneath, right? So if we spelled this like a D sharp, it would exist inside of our E Lydian over here, and it would be perfectly reasonable. But I changed the harmony underneath. I was like, okay, I'll make it the minor third of a chord so it has a dark sound. Right, so then it became C, and then I just basically added a little 9. Or no, 2/3 suspension. I added a little minor 2/3 suspension, which is basically just what that is. And then it becomes A flat. So again, it's similar to similar. I wanted to keep the harmonic. It modulates, but I wanted to keep the harmonic. The way that the melody interacts with the harmony, I wanted it to be fairly consistent across. Because if you make the harmony too weird and you just use lots of different harmonic devices across a tune that are pretty disparate, it prevents it from becoming memorable. Because remember, the harmony really helps the melody be memorable, because you remember the harmony when you hear the tune. So that's why I tried to be consistent with that. And then this is where it either goes to just, A flat major 6 to 1, and then I just added, the thing that I like to do, which is a 9 in suspension on the 1 chord, and then on the 6 chord. Right, I do that on a lot of tracks because I like it, because you get 2 different voices that have the suspension, yada, and then the low voice, yada, yada, yada. Right, so. Pretty simple. And then the other one was just continuing with the flat 6 thing. So where I go down to G, but then figure out what G is the flat 6 of. In this case, it's B minor. And then I thought it would sound kind of cool to go down to B flat 6. So where, this G goes from being the flat 6 of minor chord to being the major 6 of a major chord, right? So this B minor just changes to a B flat major, and the D remains constant between the two. So I'll go ahead and show you what that sounds like. Let me scoot this over here and play this. Okay. So I like that. It's a little weird, it's a little strange, but it has a, that might be like a development. Like we start with a normal thing, but then we do that later, and it's like, oh, whoa, I didn't expect that. So we might reserve that as sort of like a extra thing that we can do. I don't know why the harmony messed up. But let me turn off magnetic layout. Bada bing. Okay, so and then this final thing right here that happens is the acoustic scale thing that I was talking about, right? So we're basically going from A flat major to D sharp minor, and again, if you want to keep the inharmonic spelling, it'd be E flat, right? So we're going from a major chord to a minor 5, right? So it's like the Mixolydian sound, right? With the Lydian, la da 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 da, that type of a thing. And then I basically just now using harmonic relativity, pretend that this D sharp minor is one chord, and then I use a little suspension, so it goes from the 1 to 2. We add the 9 to the chord, and then when we go to the 6th chord, it's still dissonant, but now it's the Lydian 4, which one's resolve upward, so it's like I'll play that by itself, so it creates a big sense of motion. Right, so you can hear that yada, it's dissonant, we want it to resolve, but then when the harmony shifts around it, we still want it to resolve, but then it has a different function. And really this should be a F sharp on top. But anyway, I'll play that. I think this is the most inherently emotional out of all of the possibilities. Yeah, and see, that to me has a really nice, like you don't expect it at all. It goes darker than it wants to, So anyway, you guys can tell me what you think about these different possibilities. I think I could use any number of them in the piece, but hopefully, the fact that we're using that whatever ideas. Because when you come up with a tune, it subconsciously makes you sort of lead up to the tune in a certain way. So with the bloops and blips that we came up with in the orchestral parts that we had begun to arrange, I didn't want to necessarily just completely change the tune after and then lose the continuity. So hopefully the ya-da-dum, the similarity emotionally of that to da-da-da-da-dum can keep it consistent. But anyway, so... and I think it's a good. I'm really glad actually that all this happened. I'm glad that I accidentally came up with a little motive that was similar to the existing piece, and then we can sort of change it, because then I can sort of talk about. It's almost like working with a temp track, right? Because working with a temp track is something that you're gonna have to deal with a lot if you want to be a film composer, and often now more and more nowadays with video game composition too, you're gonna have to work with a temp track. And in case you're not familiar with the concept, they basically give you a reference, a piece of music that is similar to the one that they want, and they want you to compose something basically as identical as possible, but while being original and not ripping them off. So that's difficult to do if you don't sort of divest. First off, the first thing, and this is kind of just a general feedback, but what you need to do is you need to figure out what they like in the music. You know what I mean? Some directors that I've worked with, it's the harmony, you know what I mean? Like they really, if you do things to the harmony, or if the way you write the harmony isn't exactly what they're thinking, they'll be like, oh no, it doesn't sound right. It sounds too medieval, or it sounds too, such and such. So you just kind of got to get to know your director. Other directors are very textural, right? So if you put like an instrument in there that they just don't like the sound of that instrument, and they often, and I have nothing against directors because a lot of them don't have musical training, but a lot of them they're not able to articulate. They don't have the vocabulary. And again, I'm not making fun of them, but it's just the reality. They don't have the vocabulary to articulate that it's the instrument they don't like, or that it's the harmony that they don't like, right? They just know that something about it they don't like, and they try to give it to you in emotional, aesthetic terms, and sometimes you just gotta work with that, and you gotta, the more you work with a particular director or producer, the more you understand what their language means, you know what I mean? You develop a relationship with them, and you get better at reading their mind, because they have a different way of communicating music than another director might. And I'll give you a perfect example. I can't remember whether or not I've told this story online, so if you're hearing it again, my apologies. But I was writing an atmosphere track for a video game a few years ago, and it was like an apocalyptic it was an apocalyptic video game. It was like a sandbox builder apocalyptic video game. And I sent him this track, and the director said, I like it, but it sounds too medieval. And I wasn't sure what he meant by that, so I tried and changed the harmony, and I made the harmony less modal and a little bit more like creepy, you know what I mean? Less like, you know what I mean, less medieval in that sense, and it didn't change. He still didn't like it, and then I was like, okay, well, let me try and change the melody to be a little bit less extroverted, so the melody's not like da 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 da. You know, maybe if I chill the melody out, and then it won't sound so much like an Elder Scrolls atmosphere track, and it'll be darker, what you want. That didn't satisfy him either. He was like, you gotta, and he couldn't communicate with me. So I went through like 3 or 4 revisions, and finally, I took out the clarinet. And he was like, yes, that's it. You know, it's that you change the texture. I was like, is it the clarinet? Is that what you think is medieval? And he says, oh yeah, is that what that instrument is? Yeah, it sounds too medieval. So for some reason, he thought that a clarinet sounds too medieval. And it's just one of those things that you just have to get used to working with particular directors. But anyway, along with this track that we're working on, I think it's a good to be able to take an existing melody like the da 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 da, the melody that you would point out was from someone else, and see if you can take it and retain the same feeling while divesting it of its motivic relationship. And I think a lot of that comes down to the molecular aspects of the music, like the harmony, the way that the melody interacts with the harmony underneath, the texture. You can make something similar texturally without ripping it off. Like, for example, like if a particular texture has like flutes, let's say like you're trying to emulate a temp track that has like a flute choir and it has a really cloudy sound, and they like, hey, I really like that cloudy sound. Well, if you try and write a melody that's similar and you use the flutes, then you really start to sound like you're ripping off the track. But think about, okay, these flutes sound cloudy, they sound pure, and they sound really just, fluffy, right? So let's see if we can achieve that sound through another way, right? So maybe you could use concertino strings, muted, quiet concertino strings up there. It's a totally different texture from flutes, but it gives a similar feeling. And again, if you have a good relationship with your director, and you know what he's looking for out of the track, you can. And that's a specific example from something I've written where I used concertino strings instead of flutes, and he liked it, and he thought it had the nice cloudy sound that he wanted. So, don't try and if you're trying to, rip off a temp track, which, sometimes you kind of have to do, don't try and rip it off on the surface level. Figure out what the director likes about it, and then underneath the surface, take those molecular elements and use that to create a new original piece of music that's your voice. You know what I mean? And I think another thing that I would say is that often in film, especially with action scenes, I've had this experience before, where you're writing music for an action scene, and the temp track that they use, they've actually edited their film to the temp track, right? So they've edited it to the tempo, to the beats and these things. And so that's really the only thing that you have to hit, and that might seem like extremely limiting, but it actually makes your work pretty easy because they've already edited it to this music. So, you can look at the track, like let's say if it's like from Batman or Interstellar, because people use Hans Zimmer tracks all the time, but let's say if it's one of those tracks, you can just look up the BPM, you can figure out, it basically gives you a pre-made sync point track to know how to hit particular moments, hard hits and soft hits for action, and then you can just create a new piece of music that is totally your own thing, but that uses those same hit points. And you shouldn't necessarily think of it like whenever someone edits to an existing track and then they give me that track, I don't think of that as like, oh, I can't write anything else. I just think of it as like, oh, they've given me a sync point track, and I don't want to get on another rabbit trail because I know this is slightly irrelevant to this, but oftentimes when I go and write, me personally, my own workflow, when I go and write music for an action scene, that's the first thing that I do is just figure out the sync points. Okay, what do I need to hit? What do I need to hit this punch? Or maybe not. Maybe I should hit this punch. Or maybe when the scene changes to this person, sometimes it's a soft hit. In other words, it's sort of it doesn't exactly hit like on a frame basis, but like it just sort of the music shifts. And sometimes it's a hard hit, like punches. Sometimes you want to, and if you do it too much, it's called Mickey Mousing, because it's you're basically like accenting every little thing that happens, and that's not something that you want. Especially nowadays, people tend to like more sort of languid music that gives you a general sense of what's happening, which is I'm getting into like a major rabbit trail here, but which is one thing I think it's really interesting about a lot of Hans Zimmer's work and Christopher Nolan, and I think it's a good thing. I think it's an interesting thing how a lot of times the music has a larger than life relationship to the film, because it's like the music is giving you the emotional undercurrent and the action undercurrent. Like for example, like Batman. If Batman's having this little fight with these guys, it's not that difficult. If you accent if you accent every little hit that Batman has, it's gonna make it seem like the fight is more important than it is. Whereas if you just have this general kind of, or the thing that he does, the little clicks and things. If you have a general sort of action track that just kind of gives you that epic feeling, but it doesn't accent every little punch, it gives you the feeling that Batman, these are just a few pawns in a larger battle that's happening, right? So accenting small things and little details versus kind of laying back and giving the action feel without accenting things, they're both equally valid and equally important approaches to action music. And depending upon what the director's vision is and what the point, is this a small moment? Is this a small skirmish? Or is it a big moment in a larger battle that's happening? Those are important decisions to make when you go about writing a piece of action music. But anyway, big rabbit trail. but yeah, so let me know what you guys think about that melody. And if you guys like it, and maybe you could pick what your favorite ending is. Ending 1, 2, or 3. That's what we'll call it. Actually, we'll put this over here, and we'll put this over here, and we'll do that. So we have these. This will be ending 1, ending 2, and ending 3. You can tell me which one you like the best. But anyway, I will be making the next episode with the orchestration very soon in the next few days. So stay tuned for that. As always, thanks for watching. I will see you guys in the next episode.